Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. My guest today is Adam Swart, the founder of Crowds on Demand, the original paid protesting firm, and a leading expert on protests, political optics, and narrative strategy. A lifetime liberal, Adam now finds himself increasingly not liberal enough for many in the modern left, and that's something we're going to get into, along with a bunch of other stuff. Adam Swart, welcome to the show.
Mike, thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
So I thought we'd just start with your organization, Crowds on Demand. You could talk a little about when you founded it, why you founded it, and, well, what it does.
So, Mike, Crowds on Demand has been around since 2012. So we've been in business for 13 years. We are the largest and original protest company. We're the largest protest company in the country, perhaps in the world. We started by organizing political protests and kind of product launches, PR stunts. We've expanded to do a whole range of advocacy and other kind of events, from building advocacy groups from the ground up to phone banking, emails, social media, everything involved in kind of advocacy or promotion of any sort nationwide. And it's been a really fun journey over the past 13 years. And it's something that's gotten a lot of attention, particularly. It always peaks in what people find interesting whenever there's some sort of election or other sort of major political event.
So I actually don't know the answer to this question. And they always say, be wary of a question you don't know the answer to, but I'm going to ask anyway, at least have a guess at, is that it seems to me that whenever there's a protest, you don't really hear anything about an organization behind it. And so I was going to ask you, well, can you talk about a couple of protests or things that you particularly are proud of? Then I thought, well, I wonder if you can even talk about that. So I don't know. What can you tell me?
Sure. Well, I actually appreciate that question. Yes, in many cases, we have confidentiality agreements with customers, and that is to protect their confidentiality. And I just want to address this initially, which is that it's not because of anything untoward. The right of anonymous political participation is huge, and especially in an era punctuated by cancel culture, both from the left and now from the right. A lot of people want to fund political activism or advocacy, but they don't necessarily want to put their name on it. I've had, under the Biden era, there are a lot of wealthy conservatives who have wanted to bankroll various initiatives or campaigns, but who say, hey, look, I would be canceled from my job, from board memberships, from other things if I was sort of linked to funding this, right? And similarly on the left now, when, with the Trump administration taking on universities, law firms, business, etc., a lot of wealthy people on the left are reticent to become publicly engaged. Personally, I think the right of anonymous political participation is huge, because you should be able to participate without career consequences on yourself. And we are often a vehicle for that. So that's sort of a preface to saying that while we can't talk about a ton of things. Just an example of one thing I'm particularly proud of was after the Cambridge Analytica scandal for Facebook, we organized the Delete Facebook awareness rallies like all over the country, but particularly in DC, that sort of culminated with Zuckerberg testifying on Capitol Hill. This was kind of several years ago. And I was so proud of that because what I think we did from the Delete Facebook was we put social media companies on notice that these algorithms were being used to foster division, to foster invasion of privacy, and to polarize the country. Now, these companies have not done that in nearly enough to combat those things, but I was so proud of putting Facebook on notice. And so much that they don't even want to be called Facebook anymore. That name has such a bad reputation.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that Crowds on Demand is the largest company of its type in the U.S. and maybe anywhere. And it got me curious, are there a lot of other firms doing what you do? I mean, how big is this kind of area?
So, Mike, I don't believe there's any other companies that publicly do this. However, I have no reason to believe that people are not doing it as a part of their business. What we're very upfront about what we do, which is that we compensate activists who are passionate about a cause to show up and in support of a cause, among other things, like I said, product launches, PR stunts for companies, etc. No other company, there are other PR firms or lobbying firms who might do those things, but they don't advertise that they do those things. So I can't comment on what they do because they're not upfront and transparent about what they do.
And you said you've been in this for a while now. It's been 13 years, if my math is right, and that would be 4 presidential administrations since you started Crowds on Demand. And so you've seen a lot. And I'm curious, what sort of changes, if any, and I've seen some, in protest and advocacy movements in all that time?
Sure. Well, I think that one thing that you've seen, so yes, correct. We launched actually pretty shortly before the 2012 election. And so, yeah, you correct that's your math is correct in 2 ways. But of course, you're a professor, so I wouldn't guess that your math would be anything less than stellar. The reality is it's changed a lot. Number one way is that you've had both sides try to really go after not the talking points, but the legitimacy of the opposition movements, using terms like AstroTurf or paid protester. You see those terms thrown out by both sides, and it is a good and a bad thing for us, because I think the idea is that, and to the extent that I think the mere existence of our business probably contributed to a lot of that discussion, because people are saying people misinterpret the fact that we pay people to attend as the idea that we are paying people who don't agree with a cause to attend an event, right? So there's been a huge change in the past in regards to this idea of legitimacy. So you're immediately, instead of engaging with the issue, the immediate thing of, if you see right-wing protesters, is, oh, it's paid by the Koch brothers, it's paid by Peter Thiel, or whatever right-wing billionaire. Definitely you see that allegation being thrown out with hands off. You say, oh, it's being funded by Soros or Hoffman or whatever, right? So now what I say is, it's almost, the stigma is removed in one sense from it, because however you go about gathering your protesters, the other side is going to accuse you of paying your protesters, right? So what I say is, just forget about that. They're going to come after that. Make the issue so compelling that it doesn't matter, because essentially my feeling is everyone has an quote unquote ulterior motive to be at a protest, right? Whether it's your union wants you there, whether it's you're impressing a girl, whether it's you're trying to make a name for yourself in media or politics, whether it's I'm trying to get on social media and to flexed on social media, whatever the case may be, there are a ton of reasons why you might be there other than your quote unquote pure support of an idea. So that's one that I've noticed big time over the past, 13 years. Another is I think that there's been a lot more political engagement. I think in 2012, we were a fairly apathetic country where you had a vast majority of Americans who just didn't pay attention to politics, right? Maybe you watch a little politics on the news, but a lot of people just knew absolutely nothing and didn't take any care to know. And I have noticed in my personal life even, but in my work life too, that there's a ton of people who 13 years ago, 10 years ago were pretty politically apathetic, maybe moderate, maybe left, maybe right, but politics was just a non-issue in their identity. And now it's the number one issue, and they have trouble making friends or having family whose views are different. And I think that is a huge tragedy. And I say that as someone who has a ton of friends and family on both sides of the aisle, and I love them all.
You mentioned AstroTurf campaigns, which is kind of a term that we use right in the field for not like a real protest, but a fake thing as opposed to a grassroots sort of movement. And it occurs to me, I wonder the extent to which any sort of mass protest can be truly authentic in that sense, because when I started thinking about stuff we potentially talk about, it occurred to me that there's an awful lot of logistics and organizing that's got to go into getting it to the point where you're in front of the cameras and so forth. And so, I mean, I'm sure you can talk obviously about that for sure.
Mike, you're so right in that. And I don't believe in the concept of grassroots or AstroTurf. It's a false dichotomy. There's this sort of fantastical idea of a grassroots protest of some moms getting together in the kitchen and making handmade signs and rallying for a cause. But in a reality, every cause from the civil rights movement, gay rights movement, Black Lives Matter, MAGA, Tea Party, all of them had millions, if not tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars behind them. Again, that does not mean that the people who are participating in those movements don't believe in those movements. So I think the term AstroTurf is one of those terms that doesn't mean anything, because if you're saying, okay, there's money involved in political movements, of course there is. But there's also people involved in political movements. Money, the value of money is money can help you make sure you're getting attention, right? If you buy ads, you're going to get attention. But if you're selling a crap product, you're ultimately not going to get anything with that attention, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to activism, protests, and advocacy, right? If your money can help fund and, compensate protesters, can help, fund, look at like the Bernie Ocasio-Cortez rallies that have been going on. I mean, they're renting out some of the most expensive arenas in the country where Taylor Swift would rent out, right? It's like, that's not free. AV is not free. Audiovisual is not free, right? Security, medical, bathrooms, all the stuff that they have to pay for, that's not free. Someone is funding that, right? And again, that doesn't mean that that's not a bad thing, but someone is funding that. So the reality is we're just very upfront about the fact that we at Crowds on Demand do pay for people and compensate people to attend. And we recognize there's money in politics. The difference between us and a lot of other people is we don't try to hide it. We say, hey, there is money, but listen to the issue. And ultimately, if we're talking about an issue no one cares about, it's not going to end up getting any traction anyway. So this concept of AstroTurf is really a non-concept.
See any, aside from issues, which are obviously going to be different, do you see any significant differences between how groups on the left and the right approach protest and how they try to get sort of public attention, public sympathy, or is it pretty much all the same except for the issues?
Well, I think both sides, one thing that both sides do together is they both appeal to their media ecosystem, right? I mean, if you go back to the Tea Party, the first Tea Party rallies, so my understanding is the Koch brothers essentially funded the Tea Party, a lot of the inception of that movement, right? But there were a lot of footage of Tea Party rallies back in 2010 when it started that were, just, I don't know, 20, 30 people wearing like Revolutionary War garb, but that Fox News sort of talked up to be like this huge thing. And then it became a huge thing, right? The same thing is true on the left. So both parties definitely appeal to their ecosystem. I think the left generally is better at organizing large crowds than the right. I think part of it is because the left has naturally been an oppositional force, right? I mean, the left has a history of rallying, right? I mean, from the 60s, Vietnam War, civil rights, gay rights, it's more ingrained in kind of left-wing culture, student activist culture, academic culture to turn out to protests than it is in conservative culture. So I think that has certainly helps, but conservatives have been getting better at it over the years. And a lot of the tactics are kind of the same. Again, appeal to the ecosystem, have big funders to make sure that you get a ton of media coverage and you have fancy websites and you have all these organizing tools. I mean, the principles are the same. The only difference is conservatives are about 10 years behind in technology and organizing.
I want to ask you about some recent protests, your professional opinion. Stu, you already mentioned the hands-off protests, and that was like something like over 1,400 individual protests all across the country. I mean, what was your take on how that came together and how successful it was? And I guess a question we haven't talked about yet is, what does it even mean to have a successful protest? And I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well.
Well, first of all, I think the hands-off protests were very successful protests because just the slogan is actually a great slogan because it's almost a libertarian slogan. It's basically like, take your hands off my stuff, right? And the timing was perfect in regards to the stock market crash, right? So it's like, hands off my money. I just lost 20% of my 401k, right? Hands off my Social Security. Doge is trying to take my Social Security that I paid into, right? So hands off is a very effective, very good slogan. And of course, the movement's well funded. It's in a ton of cities where you can't organize 1,400 protests without any money. I mean, it's impossible. Just the permitting alone for blocking off the streets, et cetera, very expensive. And the focus on economic issues of tariffs are going to increase the prices. I'm losing money on my 401k, and they're trying to cut my Social Security. I mean, that's pretty compelling. And when the left focuses on economic issues like that, conservatives should be scared because it's very effective. I think when you have more the social justice, the Palestine, all that stuff involved, that's when it starts losing the thread. And it's easier for Republicans to dismiss it as, oh, well, this is just the left being wacky.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
At Sephora, we've got what you want because you're obsessed with your skin and we're obsessed with what it needs. Sephora has the best products to help you get beautiful, glowing, radiant skin. With an extensive, inclusive range of results-driven formulas and in-store beauty advisors to help you find exactly which are right for you, the best skincare is only at Sephora. Sephora, for all your skincare.
What's your take on those Tesla protests? And they seem to me, they came a little bit before the hands-off thing. It felt to me a little less organized, a little more kind of freestyle, though I'm sure there was plenty of organization. But how did you see those?
Well, That's interesting because I kind of have this theory that Tesla short sellers are ultimately behind the funding of some of those protests. I mean, just for your audience, I mean, you probably have a smart audience, but just in case they don't know what short selling is, it's basically if you make money when the stock goes down. So basically, these guys have been losing like tens, if not, I think hundreds of billions of dollars shorting Tesla stock because essentially the stock has skyrocketed over the past 15 years since Elon has been in control. And these guys have been losing a ton of money up until recently when there's been these major declines in the stock. And so I think these guys are apolitical. They're just trying to make money, right? They're like, okay, Elon Musk is now involved in the Trump administration. Now this is, who buys Teslas? Like electric cars, a lot of them are more people on the left, right? They are, or cosmopolitan at least, right? People who are not fans of President Trump, right? So here's an opportunity to capitalize on this and to organize protests. To be clear, I'm not naming any specific person. I have no proof, but generally, if you follow the money, you will get to who is funding a movement, right? In 9 out of 10 cases. So I believe it wouldn't make, if you had $10 billion on the line and you could spend $10 million to potentially recoup it, you would do it. So I don't see why they wouldn't do it.
It's the same logic behind lobbying. I mean, yeah, that never really occurred to me, but now that you mentioned that, I think about other boycotts and other things, and I find my cynical mind thinking, well, who could have made some money off of that in the market? So.
Correct. I mean, the reality is the Tesla boycott is one of the most effective I've ever seen because boycotts are generally very hard to do, right? Like the Target boycott fell totally flat, right? Totally flat. The only boycott the conservatives ever made work was Bud Light. They talked that up so much. Conservatives were giving me hate for telling them that they don't know how to organize a boycott to save their lives. They're like, oh, well, look at what we did with Bud Light. I was like, that's the one that you did. That's the one. Right? They tried to boycott Bank of America. They tried to start their own conservative bank, and it was just a total mess, right? So liberals are generally better at boycotts than conservatives for the same reasons I outlined about the protests. They have a better organizing framework. But for Tesla, it's easy because you have so much choice in cars, and a car is such a symbol of our identity. Right. I mean, they've been selling us cars as a symbol for our identity for the last 100 years. So a Tesla historically has been a symbol of your forward thinking, you're progressive, you're practical, right? And kind of like a Prius used to be. And now that car doesn't have the same connotation. So the Prius drivers who switch to Tesla, I think might switch back to Priuses.
And probably, I would say, in the last few years, the biggest and most, at least felt the most consequential protest movement were those pro-Palestine, anti-Israel protests on multiple college campuses last year. And it seemed to me that you could see them as being successful and that they got a lot of attention, but there's also been an awful lot of backlash. And so now, more than, I guess, a year, not quite a year out, I'm trying to figure out exactly how we weigh the success of that sort of thing.
Well, from a policy standpoint, it failed, but they failed based on a particular bet. They thought that Harris was going to win, like many people did. And had Harris won the 2024 election, the movement, I think, would have generally been a success. And I'll tell you why. They were not trying to convince people on the right to see things in the Palestine point of view. They were trying to really push people on the Democrat side to see things in the Palestine point of view. And it forced Harris to really walk a tightrope on that issue for fear of losing the Arab American support. And by the way, she did lose a lot of that support, and that, in Michigan and some of the other states that have a large kind of Palestinian American or Arab American communities. But I think the thesis was we're going to push Harris sort of to the left on this. I mean, to the Palestine perspective on this by saying, hey, we'll vote for you, but you owe us, right? So had Harris won, there would be immense pressure from the left for her to push Israel to make a deal more on the pro-Palestinian terms. Now, of course, that didn't happen. So the ultimate result, given the current set of facts, was that the movement was a failure.
You know, you mentioned that the goal wasn't to try to convince people on the right. And it seems to me that more broadly, my take is that's sort of how protests work, is that because when I see someone, I'm center left, when I see some far right person or even honestly some far left person protesting, I'm more likely to be turned off than encouraged. And so sometimes I guess you got to wonder, well, who is this exactly directed at? And it's not a question I don't know that people think about a whole lot, but you obviously do.
Well, correct. And I always ask people, the clients, who are we trying to convince, right? Or, I mean, to some extent, there's a value of galvanization, right? So I agree. So in the sense of the Palestine, there wasn't any convincing on either side. That's part of why we didn't involve ourselves in the movement, because I much prefer to convince than to galvanize. I would rather have people go and see, hey, wow, like I would have considered taking on a Palestine cause if it was focusing on the human rights abuses over there, right? Not saying, and to say, hey, look, this isn't good for Israel or for Palestine to have these major human rights abuses in Gaza, right? So I would have entertained that notion, but the reality is that it was more about galvanization and a lot of protests. But the reality is a lot of protest organizers don't think about how to convince, because I'm essentially selling a product to our clients. I want to show them, hey, they're putting this money into our company, right, to organize something. What am I planning to deliver for them, right? Like if they pay me $200,000 to organize a series of protests, $200,000 later, what have I accomplished? What of their objectives have I accomplished? Have I changed a policy? Have I changed a law? Have I changed an outcome? What do I have to show for that money? Because I like to show tangible results. I think with some organizers, they don't think about that. They're like, hey, we want to organize for Palestine. Okay, well, great. Well, you're organizing people who already support the cause to chant loudly. And you said you're center left. A lot of center left people who are saying, hey, I'm a professor. I just want to go to campus. I don't agree with Netanyahu. I'm not saying you, I'm saying in general. I don't agree with Netanyahu. I don't agree with how Israel is prosecuting this war, but I don't like the idea of students taking over campus, telling Jewish students they're not allowed in this area, vandalizing, chanting so loudly I can't go to sleep, right? Like, if I'm sitting here from a center left perspective, I'm like, I hate these guys. It actually pushes me more to, I can't deal with these Palestine folks. There's just no point. Right. And that's a bad position to be in.
Well, it occurs to me, too, that I guess the two questions I would want to ask folks who were interested in protesting is not just who are you hoping to talk to have your voices heard by, but what's your ask? What do you expect people to do? And I can see like with the Tesla protests, say, don't buy a Tesla. OK, that's a pretty clear and straightforward ask, and people can do that. But it seems like with a lot of protests, I'm thinking I'm going to go way back like to the Occupy Wall Street protests. And honestly, I'm not really sure what that was about or what they expected to accomplish. I'm pretty sure they didn't, but I guess there were some fun drum circles and things, and I don't know. But it seems to me another important question. What do you want to have happen?
Well, if you're rating protests on number of participants to results achieved, the Occupy Wall Street protest was perhaps the most ineffective movement in American history. So part of why I like to involve myself in these things and clients bring me in is how do you channel activism and activists and participants into action. Because sometimes I have to build a movement where, like, I mean, Occupy had millions of people involved, but sometimes I have a movement with 100 people and I want to change something. How do I get 100? Like, my goal is to give the clients the most change for the fewest number of people. Occupy is the opposite of what we would do because there was no cohesive narrative. It was just Wall Street's corrupt. Okay, we all know Wall Street's corrupt, right? You know, had they said, President Obama, we demand you hold these set of companies and these people accountable in these ways, and here's our demand, and we're going to be here until you do this, and until you limit these companies in this way, they would have actually gotten success. I mean, back in that time, people hated Wall Street, hated bankers. I was just talking to someone about how the most popular thing Obama could have done was put those guys in jail. And it was actually a courageous decision for him not to, because it would have tanked the economy to do that. But Occupy, based on their talking points, should have pushed for that and should have really leaned on Obama and the other Democrats who had basically 60 seats in the Senate, overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives at that time, to say, put those cheats in jail and put limits that they'll never recover from these companies. Let them go bust, right? Don't bail them out, right? There was no cohesive narrative. It was like, dude, Wall Street's corrupt. Let's drum and let's smoke some pot. Like, I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, they should be ashamed of how ineffective they were.
It also seems to me that you should be asking yourself the question of, well, what if we are successful? Like, I think about something like the Tea Party movement, which started out as these protests, but clearly they had some infrastructure, they had some institutional support, they had media support, and they took that initial energy and they built it into this lasting thing that, for better or worse, depending on how you look at it, made real changes in the world of politics. And to me, that I would think would be the ultimate goal, but that's got to be awfully difficult to pull off in real life.
Correct. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's the dog that caught the car. Right. I mean, I think MAGA 2016 was kind of the dog that caught the car, because a lot of people didn't think they'd win, right, against Hillary Clinton, right? So I think there was certain surprise that they actually pulled it off, right? So I think when you are successful, when more than that, you should have a plan for success, but the biggest thing is to have a cohesive set of views that is loose enough to bring in a coalition, but tight enough where you know what to demand. Because when you get the attention of policymakers, you have to actually seek, like, what am I looking for? Like, when you complain about a product, and let's just say you write to the head of the company and you say, I don't like your product. Okay, I don't like the product. Well, the head of the company says, well, what do you want me to do about it? Do you want a refund? Do you want me to send you a new one? Right? What is the resolution to this? Right? And that's what policymakers are looking for. So if you don't have specific asks, then you're kind of wasting your time, and it's sort of self-masturbatory, some of the activism. Now, of course, there's some value of just saying, hey, I support this cause, you support this cause, let's hang out. So there's a social benefit of that. So I don't want to 100% minimize the value of organizing just around generally shared ideas. But as a general fact, if you have a ton of people, you may as well coalesce around a set of issues.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to the importance of timing in protests and with the hands-off protests. And it occurred to me, too, that this can maybe be applied more broadly to sort of the public's attention span, because most Americans don't really pay that much attention to politics except when huge things are going on or right before elections, a month or two like that. And so it occurred to me that if you're planning a protest, you would probably have to weigh the energy level, the interest level of the people who are most likely to protest, who are going to be very different from normal Americans. But also, if you're looking for some sort of effect, you ideally would want to link it to an election or some big event. So the general public it's going to resonate with them. And that's got to be pretty tricky to pull off as well, no?
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, that's not to sell my company again, but yeah, that's what Crowds On Demand does. We work with clients to try to make the biggest bang for their buck. So we're trying to, so just as a non-political example, if you're a company that wants to do a big event, don't just do it somewhere random, do it outside a major conference where your potential customers are going to be at, right? So yes, if you're going to do a major protest in Washington, D.C., do it when Congress is in session, right? So yeah, you want to choose the right moments. And this is, you actually make you allude to another interesting point, Mike, is that a lot of times people, in addition to not focusing on the right asks, they're not focusing on the right people. So for example, I'll give you the sort of another non-political example of, you're mad at a delayed flight and you're screaming at the flight attendant. It's like, well, what does the flight attendant have to do with a delayed flight? They have no capacity to get your flight on time. You're just being rude, right? There are people there's someone in management who scheduled the airline, the planes too close together, right? Or they didn't do the right maintenance, or they didn't schedule things effectively. They didn't schedule enough downtime for the crew, whatever the case may be, but you're yelling at the wrong person, right? So a lot of protest movements focus on people who actually have no capacity to change things, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to rally against Trump at Los Angeles City Hall. Well, I guarantee you the Los Angeles City Council does not support Donald Trump, right? So what do they have to do with Trump, right? What is the effect of rallying at LA City Hall around Donald Trump, right? Seriously, there's no effect. There's no effect. The city council is like, yes, we agree with you. We don't like Trump. You don't like Trump. And again, it's just self-masturbatory.
It occurs to me also that the issue is pretty important as well, because, like, for instance, I think that a critical issue of our time is permitting reform, which right away means I'm a huge geek, but I find it difficult to figure out how one would be able to organize a protest around permitting reform, because some issues, when I think about protests, I think about catchy chants like hands off or something like that, or placards, those signs. And it seems to me that some issues just fit that so much better than other issues.
Oh, absolutely. And we get hired to organize around a lot of that. And part of what we do is try to relate that to broader issues, right? So you say permitting reform, I say housing crisis, right? I say housing is too expensive, right? And the way that we make housing less expensive is permitting reform. So we're rallying for permitting reform, but we're saying stop the housing crisis now. The rent is too damn high, right? Remember that guy? Where is he? Right? Where is that guy? He was so popular, and now the rent has only gotten higher. So part of what my job is to do is take something that is a geeky issue that maybe is paid for by a special interest group, right? So maybe, I mean, you're a professor, but maybe there's a special interest group. There are a lot of special interest groups that want permitting reform, and it's something we have worked on in certain localities and states. So I love that example. So we try to say, hey, at the root of the housing crisis, why it's so expensive, why our cities are not affordable is the fact that you can't build anything, right? So let's just say. So as a result, we're bringing in housing activists, right? YIMBY, so to speak, right? So that's why we're not saying it's permitting reform. So you're taking a geeky issue and you're making it into this. Housing is, I think, a major concern for most Americans.
Yeah, we already talked about one, I guess I'll call it a misconception about protest, but I think it's more that people don't really even think about how expensive it can be to organize and all the logistics involved. But other than that, I'm sure there are other misconceptions or that people have or things they don't realize about protests and that you do. And I'm curious what some of those might be.
Well, one of the ones is that the one misconception is that you need a permit to protest. And you only need a permit if you're going to block off streets or use amplified sound, right? So you have a lot of people ask, and even some police officers are misinformed as to the idea of what a permit is. And I have to educate them, or my staff has to educate them, or call in their supervisors, because you have a right to, the First Amendment does not say you have the right to free assembly with a permit. It's right to free assembly, right? There's no permit is not mentioned by Thomas Jefferson, did not mention a permit in the First Amendment. So the idea of a permit is if you're going to do something extremely disruptive. So if you're going to block off a street, if you're going to have amplified sound, if you're going to do something like late at night, early in the morning, whatever, right? So number one, you have an absolute right to demonstrate, provided that you're not blocking anything. So that's something that every American should be aware of, and law enforcement needs to know to not infringe upon those rights. So that's actually a way that protesting is easier than you think. But a way that it's harder than you think is in regards to the fact that organizing people to get in line, all chant this, kind of have a cohesive chant, have good signs that look good on camera. You know, if it's a large protest, you need an AV setup, and anyone who's ever organized a wedding or a conference knows AV is expensive. So, you know, you need a stage. Staging is expensive, right? Then you need a permit as part of that, right? So the larger you organize, the more expensive it is, right? But there's a lot of organization that goes into protests that a lot of people who see them don't know. They don't just sort of pop up, right? Here's an example of why pop-up protests don't work. Have you ever seen these potheads who are protesting for cannabis, right? A lot of them, they're high. They're not, some of them are just sort of holding signs. Some of them, no signs. They're just kind of bedraggled people, and they're not very effective. That's probably why, despite overwhelming support for cannabis reform, there's still been no traction, because the existing players have just not done a good job at it because they haven't organized well. So, you know, that's what happens when you don't organize. So anything you've seen that gets on the news, I guarantee you there's money on it. Because the people who can organize such to get things on the news have PR people, they have press people, they have good signs, they have organization, they have speakers, they have everything you need.
In the intro, I mentioned that while you consider yourself a liberal, you said that today's left at one point is a party of tantrums, not ideas, and that you're often seen as not liberal enough. And so I was hoping you could talk about that change over time as well.
Well, sure. And to be clear, I don't affiliate myself with the Trump movement either. I'm an independent. I don't have a political home. And our company does work on behalf of liberals and conservatives where I see value in advancing their causes. So I don't have to 100% agree with the cause to believe that it has the right to be advanced, right? Just because, for example, if CBS would take an ad from someone they don't agree with, right? So I don't have to 100% agree with it, but I wouldn't take on a cause that I 100% disagree with that's hateful, offensive, etc., backed by a hostile foreign country, etc., right? We wouldn't do that. But to get back to sort of the root of your question, which is why I don't feel at home in the Democratic Party, well, number one, the censorship part is a big problem for me, is the idea of saying, hey, I respect everyone's views and I have friends on all sides of the political aisle, but the left has become, okay, if you don't see things 100% our way, we're going to assume you're a hateful bigot, as opposed to, okay, well, let's agree to disagree on issue X and Y and let's fight together on issue Z, right? So number one, it's the censorship part. And I think part of it is because many on the left have very strongly held ideas that change over time, by the way. But look at the transgender debate, right, is that 10 years ago, no one was using pronouns. And now it's kind of the debate has been, okay, if you don't believe a 10-year-old should be able to have an irreparable hormone treatment, right, that changes their body forever, impacts bone density, etc., now you're a bigot, right? And it's like, whoa, rewind there. Like, let's examine this issue. The countries in Europe that are generally cited as progressive countries have banned gender transition hormone therapies for minors, right? And these are European countries that the left generally hails as progressive countries, right? We're not talking about Saudi Arabia here, right? So there's an unwillingness to have some of those debates in the left, right? And some of it is just sort of radical policies. I mean, DEI has gone way too far, right? Defund the police, right? Have you been to San Francisco lately? The area I grew up in, that area, and San Francisco has just become an absolute mess. They've lost their flagship Nordstrom, their flagship Macy's, their flagship Bloomingdale's, Barney's, right? No one's shopping downtown because they legalized theft, right? There's a district attorney who legalized theft. He said he's not going to prosecute theft under, I think it was $1,000. So what do the thieves do? They steal under $1,000, right? Car break-ins all the time, right? Violent felons who get released, right? So these are not common sense policies that are adopted by Democrats. And while I think the Republicans are totally out of step with the American people on so many issues, such as the moronic tariffs, such as, the hatred for our allies overseas, for example, the terrible policies there, I think that on common sense issues, Donald Trump has been able to show himself as a common sense guy as opposed to these sort of wacky ideas from the left.
And you said, though, because I feel like there's certainly some of that on the right as well. This idea that if you're not agreeing with Donald Trump, you're a rhino, or you're an enemy of the people or something like that. But you feel like even so, there's more of it on the left than there is on the right.
There's the right is increased. So what's interesting is both sides hate their apostates the most.
Yeah.
Right. So like Republicans hate Lindsey Graham. Right. Lindsey Graham's a pathetic little character,
Thank
right?
you.
Because Lindsey.
Yes. So yes.
I mean, and I say that as a moderate who, like, I loved Senator McCain, right? And Lindsey Graham has long associated himself with McCain, and then he then decided to associate himself with Trump and kind of repudiate McCain, which was just pathetic. And because no one in MAGA respects him, but now he's lost respect from the moderates too, right? So it's just, he's such a pathetic little worm who's despised by everybody because MAGA knows he's not MAGA. Or there's this lady who's running for governor in Arizona, Karen Taylor Robson. I'm not sure if you've heard of her. I mean, the same general deal. She was a moderate Republican, very wealthy business woman, and previously more aligned with McCain, and now she's trying to align herself with Trump, but the MAGA people know she's not MAGA. So it's like, don't pretend to be MAGA, right? So I think MAGA has a big problem with people who are pretending to be MAGA, or certainly the apostates. I think they have more interest in people who are on the left who are kind of saying, hey, let's have a conversation. And of course, so both sides hate their apostates the most. I mean, it's natural. You feel like, hey, they betrayed us, right? I mean, the Republicans hate, Romney, of course, so much that he didn't run for re-election. So I'm not here to shill for the Republicans by any stretch of the imagination. There's, the purity tests now. The fealty to Trump is truly pathetic, but it's more pathetic when I see it from someone like Lindsey Graham, who I know doesn't believe a word he says, and is just one of the most. He reminds me of, if you've ever watched the Game of Thrones, of Reek from Game of Thrones, who had his what cut off in the first season. I mean, like he's like a eunuch, you know. I have so many other things to say about Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, we could go on. No, I'm you have struck a chord with me, but that's maybe because John McCain was sort of a hero of mine. Like you said, he and Lindsey were good buddies, and I feel like he died and Lindsey went off the rails, and it's pathetic is a good word for it. But yeah, look, getting back to campaigns more specifically, what advice would you have aside from, check out Crowds on Demand for people who, they want to get publicity for a cause, or they want to get more people to support their cause? What are the things that you think would be the most important things for them to do, and maybe even the most important things for them to not to do or avoid?
Great question. Avoid, don't be vulgar. Don't threaten people. I mean, I know that's pretty advice. Don't threaten people. I mean, you'd be surprised. That comes up a lot. So don't be vulgar. Don't threaten people. Try to convince people. But number one, is figure out who actually has the power to give you what you want, right? That's what I was saying earlier. A lot of people they're barking up the wrong tree. They're pitching a congressman on a local issue. They're pitching a city council member on a federal issue. Bark up the right tree is the number one thing. And then put pressure on that person, because if you're focusing on 500 people and you don't have millions of dollars, you're not going to be able to pressure 500 people. But if you have a limited budget or a smaller group of activists, but you can identify, hey, these 3 city council people are the ones who are the deciding votes on an issue that's really important to me. Call those people, meet with those people. Find the people who they listen to and lobby those people, right? Focus on the people who actually have the capacity to get you what you want, and don't just throw tantrums. I mean, I guess I called the Democratic Party a party of tantrums partially because don't throw tantrums. Get whatever done. Get it done. Figure out who has the power and get it done.
All right. Well, on that very kind of energizing advice, get it done, I think that's a good place to close. Adam Swart, it's been great talking with you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, Mike. Have a good one. And I so enjoyed this discussion.
Thanks for listening to this Politics Guys interview. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do that in a bunch of ways. Our email, mail@politicsguys.com, and there's also Facebook and X. Links are in the show notes for both of them. There's also our Discord discussion forum for supporters, which I am on all the time. And if you're not already a supporter, I hope you'll consider becoming one. As a supporter, you get ad-free versions of everything we release, the full-length midweek episode instead of just a preview, and access to that Politics Guys Discord group where you can interact with me, Trey, and other listeners. You can support us on Patreon, where you can sign up for a free trial. You can also support us on Venmo or through PayPal, and support links are always in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. If you'd like to get our full-length midweek episodes, but you're not in a position to financially support the podcast, that's not a problem at all. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us out if you can just go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever podcast app you use, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And finally, a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, David Dean, Jeremy Larson, and Brian Matza.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,